Damn, has it already been 2 years since I did the Metroid marathon? And has it really been 3 years since I did my first video on the original Metroid? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I finally got an HD capturing device, and the first game I'll be reviewing with this magnificent thing is Metroid Prime for the GameCube. Like with Metroid Fusion, fans of the series had to wait 8 years to see another game in the franchise since the glorious Super Metroid on the SNES. And believe it or not, there was never a 3D Metroid game on the Nintendo 64. Samus herself did make an appearance in Super Smash Bros., but it still wasn't a Metroid game, and fans started becoming concerned. The then new Nintendo GameCube was released, and in 2002, we were finally given Samus' first 3D adventure, Metroid Prime. And oddly enough, this game isn't actually developed by Nintendo, but only published by them and actually in the hands of Retro Studios, the company known nowadays for making Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze. However, upon first glance at the game with its trailers, people were immediately skeptical with it because it went for a first-person perspective rather than a third, and everybody thought that it was just going to be a generic first-person shooter and be a gigantic flop. But when Metroid Prime was released, there was praise for it like nothing else. The fans loved it, the critics loved it, everything they thought was going to be bad in this game was not present at all. Sort of similar to the thoughts on the Tomb Raider reboot when Crystal Dynamics decided to redo Lara Croft's character and they made her look like a wimp, but when playing it, most people liked her more than ever. Alright, that's the game's history, time to talk about the game itself. In the timeline, the Prime games take place some moments after the events of the original Metroid, but before the events of Metroid 2. In the opening sequence, Samus receives a distress signal from a space pirate frigate and decides to check it out, where she discovers that most of the space pirates inside are dying from their own genetically modified experiments, and the ship has been totally wrecked. Upon reaching the far end of the ship, Samus comes across the most dangerous of the experiments, known as the Parasite Queen, which is a pathetically easy boss fight. It makes me wonder how the hell the space pirates lost to her. Anyway, after disposing of the Parasite Queen, it falls into the ship's reactor core and activates a self-destruct sequence, where you have to escape before time runs out. Damn it, Samus, you've been there for 5 minutes and you're already blowing something up. You really need to see someone about that. However, whilst escaping, she comes across a resuscitated, fully bionic Ridley done by the space pirates, with the name Meta Ridley. That's right, we have a $6 million alien here.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the capability to make the world's first pterodactyl, dragon, what the hell is he? Ridley will be that alien. Better than he was before. Better. Stronger. Faster.
While Samus is trying to make haste, an explosion occurs behind her, knocking her back and losing all of her equipment. This in itself is a pretty lousy excuse for having to get all of your upgrades back, especially considering what Samus went through in the original game, but oh boy, wait until we get to this game. So Samus manages to get to her gunship in time, evades the pirate frigate, and follows Meta Ridley towards a planet to investigate called Talent 4. Where are the other 3 talents, you might be asking? Hey, don't look at me, ask the galactic football player over there. So yeah, the rest of the game takes place on Talent 4, and this is where Metroid Prime really begins. As you can no doubt tell, the game uses a first-person perspective to let you see things from the eyes of Samus, but otherwise the non-linear style gameplay we've come to know and love has for the most part been unchanged. Like with the 2D games, you need to explore almost every area that you can possibly search through and get all of your gear back by either looking in certain rooms or by defeating numerous bosses you encounter. The environments of Metroid Prime are stuff that we've seen before, but each of them still feel very atmospheric and still invoke a sense of isolation. There's your typical jungle area, your ancient area, your fire area, your ice area, and your mining and research area. Now you're probably wondering how exactly an FPS game handles with a GameCube controller when there's only one analog stick. Shooting is done by pressing the A button, and you jump by pressing the B button, but you are able to switch it around if that doesn't make you feel comfortable. Missiles are shot by pressing the Y button, and the X button allows you to turn into your morph ball form. Still just as confusing as to how it works. While the C-stick doesn't control the camera, you are able to manually aim by holding down the right trigger. However, Samus can't do this while moving, so it's really meant for looking around and shooting at targets out of your line of sight. Not to worry though, because holding down the left trigger will activate Samus' new lock-on ability, where she's able to automatically follow an enemy and have an easier time killing them. What the C-stick does instead is activate certain beam weapons based on the direction they're set. Speaking of which, making their return for the 2D games are the Wave Beam, the Ice Beam, the Plasma Beam, and of course Samus' regular Power Beam. The beam weapons actually act slightly different than they did before. The Power Beam, for instance, has a much higher firing rate, the Wave Beam doesn't travel through walls anymore but has electrical properties, the Ice Beam can sometimes shatter an enemy outright upon letting out a charge shot, and the Plasma Beam now brings out a lot of heat, allowing it to incinerate enemies. Hands down the most powerful weapon in the game. No, the beams don't stack up anymore. There unfortunately aren't any new beam weapons to the series as of yet, but we are able to get expansions for the existing ones we have that add a little more of a punch to them. The power beam gets the returning super missiles, the wave beam gets the wave buster, which costs a lot of missiles to use, but it defeats enemies pretty easily. The ice beam gets the ice sprayer, which I rarely use, and the plasma beam gets the flamethrower, which I never use because it has a really short range, which makes it pretty impractical. But it's not just the beam weapons that have a slight change to them, some of the power-ups do too. The space jump, for example, no longer allows you to travel an infinite amount of height, but rather acts as a simple double jump. I guess this makes sense because I suspect programming the space jump like it did in the 2D games would probably be a little difficult to do and would most likely break the game. Also making a comeback is the spider ball from Metroid 2. However, this time, instead of sticking to any given surface, you're only allowed to use it on these magnetic rails you'll find scattered about. Again, like the space jump, if it acted like it did in Metroid 2, then it would be incredibly broken. But otherwise, the other power-ups you obtain act very similarly to how they did before, including the Varia suit and the gravity suit that you get down the road. Although there's no screw attack in this game, so if you're a fan of somersaulting your enemies to death, then well, I'm sorry to say that you can't do that in this game. On a side note here, the grapple beam from Super Metroid finally returns as well, and it's incredibly fun to use as it makes me feel like a heavily armored Spider-Man. Unfortunately, like Super Metroid, you won't be using it too often, so you can only have fun with it for so long. Also returning from Super Metroid is the X-ray visor, which can still help you find any hidden expansions, but it can also assist in seeing invisible platforms you could hop across. It's also very useful against these really annoying enemies called the Chozo Ghosts, who constantly disappear and take a lot of hits. However, you don't get the X-ray visor until pretty late in the game, and by the time you do, the damage has already long been done. But Metroid Prime actually introduces a few new power-ups to the series as well. First, we have the Boost Ball, which is pretty self-explanatory and it's mainly used for traveling up half-pipes. You are able to attack enemies with it, but I don't find it very reliable and you can't do any damage to them without damaging yourself. Next, we have the Thermal Visor, which again sort of speaks for itself, but it's also the way of seeing in the dark. It can be pretty cool to use, but I'd rather not make myself constantly see red, orange, and yellow all the time, and it can also be pretty disorienting, so I try to turn it off as soon as I can. Finally, we have Samus' new Phazon suit, which gives her the best protection in the game and makes her invulnerable to a hazardous substance called Phazon. Now would be a good time to talk about Samus' most important power-up, the Scan Visor. You get this as soon as you start the game, and it allows you to get a little information on the object you just scanned. You see, Metroid Prime is a game that lets you put the puzzle pieces together by scanning certain things, while simultaneously giving you little clues as you explore Talon 4. What starts off as a simple objective of chasing Meta Ridley becomes something even greater the more you learn about the planet. The modern day equivalent to this would be the first Bioshock game, where it uses various set pieces, lost tape recordings, and real-time cinematics to let you figure out what's going on. If you want any amount of story in this game, then the most crucial things you need to scan are the Chozo lores. By reading through them, you see that many years ago a meteor crashed into Talon 4 that carried the dangerous chemical Phazon that I mentioned earlier, and also contains a creature called the Worm. To stop the Phazon from spreading and to seal the worm, the Chozo have built an artifact temple over the impact crater, and it's up to Samus to get inside the crater and destroy the source of the Phazon. But in order to get inside the impact crater, she needs to find 12 Chozo artifacts hidden throughout Talon 4, but I'll get back to that later. While investigating the planet, you'll come across many enemies in the game. Some more frustrating and dangerous than others, but if you've been collecting a bunch of energy tanks and missile expansions in your travels, then there should only be a rare case of dying. We've got your traditional small enemies like Zoomers and Shriek Bats from the 2D games, but we also have the returning big guns such as the space pirates with different methods of attacking and different ways of killing them, and of course Metroids. The Metroids actually no longer need the ice beam and missiles to kill them now, as any weapon can do the job just fine. Though they do take a lot of hits if you use the power beam on them, and the ice beam and missile combo is still the most effective. Once you get the power bombs and the Phazon mines, however, you can nuke all those little bastards in one hit, and man is it satisfying. Also in the Phazon mines, you'll eventually encounter new types of Metroids that have been exposed to Phazon and are a lot more aggressive. Hunter Metroids have long tentacles that can latch onto you and suck your life away, and Fission Metroids are able to duplicate, as well as only being vulnerable to certain beam weapons depending on the color of their nuclei. Graphically speaking, it's one of the best looking GameCube games ever made, and it still looks quite nice today. The music is also just as catchy as it was in the 2D games, though I'm not a particularly big fan of the theme that plays when you revisit the frigate from the beginning of the game, where it's now crashed and flooded. The sound for the most part is also good stuff, but that cry that the space pirates do in the middle of their theme gets incredibly annoying. Yeah, because that's what I want in a Metroid game, a dying humpback whale screaming in my ears. The Prime games also have a lot more bosses and mini-bosses than the 2D games ever did, each of them being bigger and meaner than the last. Now some of them aren't too much of a problem to deal with, but there are a few where you'll need to be pretty cautious because they will kick your ass if you don't. One or two of them can also take quite a while to beat, so prepare yourself for a few lengthy battles when you come across these guys, particularly up against Stardust and the Omega Pirate. If you were hoping that Kraid would make an appearance in this game, then I'm sad to say that he's nowhere to be seen. There were plans of bringing him in, and they even created a character model for him, which by the way looks pretty ridiculous with a metal head, but due to time constraints he had to be removed from the final game. Mother Brain's not in this game either, so you unfortunately won't be breaking any glass shells and pumping her full of missiles at any point. So now, onto the hunt for the Chozo artifacts, which is honestly the worst part of the game. You see, the artifacts are hidden in specific rooms throughout the planet where you'll need to do a lot of backtracking and collect all 12 of them, now that you're fully equipped. You can get hints in the artifact temple to give you good ideas to where each of the artifacts might be, and the artifacts themselves aren't too cryptic to find, but the bottom line is that this is a very poor way of padding out the game. There may also be one or two artifacts that'll drive you up the wall because you swear that you searched everywhere but still can't seem to find the damn thing. Like this one in the Pendrana Drifts where you have to climb into this tower, destroy the crates inside, break the window, and shoot a missile at this bulgy red thing on another tower that you can't lock on, causing this other tower to fall and then reveal the hidden artifact.
Did you get all that? Good, because you need to find 11 more of those.
Well, once you do collect all the artifacts and return to the temple, just as we're about to gain access to the impact crater, Meta Ridley shows up out of nowhere and now we can finally blast him out of the sky. Meta Ridley himself can really pack a punch against first-timers, like regular Ridley did in Super Metroid. But if you know what to do in this fight, then it shouldn't be too bad. It just takes a while to beat him. If you want to make the battle much shorter though, then if you use the boost ball on Meta Ridley while he's on the ground, then there's a chance that his wings will burn, stopping him from flying and effectively lowering 2/3 of his health. Once Meta Ridley is defeated, the Artifact Temple's defense system is activated and finishes him off, finally allowing you access to the impact crater to destroy the worm, along with the coolest voice ever put on video games.
Impact crater.
Like with Torian in the 2D games, the impact crater is a very small area with only a few rooms. But exactly like Torian, it's filled to the brim with Metroids, specifically Fission Metroids, and they can be a real pain in the neck to get by. Upon gunning your way past the Metroids, however, we at long last come across the source of Talon Forest Phazon, Metroid Prime, which really doesn't look like a Metroid at all and makes me wonder how many evolutions of Metroids could there possibly be. I mean, I would have thought the Queen Metroid would be maximum, but does Metroid Prime have a higher authority than the Queen? I'm looking too deep into this. I'm honestly not that big a fan of the final battle against Metroid Prime, because all you need to do here is attack it with the right beam weapon until it changes color. And you can only do very little damage to Metroid Prime, so I hope you've made plenty of time to fight this guy because you're in for a long battle. If you have the expansions for each of the beam weapons, then it does make it a little shorter, but it's still lengthier than necessary. And not only that, there's also a second form that you've got to beat. This is where you find out that Samus's Phazon suit is able to absorb purified Phazon and put her in hyper mode, where her attack power increases tremendously, something we're going to be seeing a lot in the third Prime game when I get around to it. Unfortunately, even with hyper mode activated, Metroid Prime's second form still takes a lot of abuse, and the pool of Phazon is only there for a short amount of time, which means that you gotta keep dodging its attacks until it decides to create Phazon diarrhea. Well, with one final blast, Metroid Prime implodes, turns into what looks like a core essence from the bosses in Metroid Fusion, where it steals the Phazon suit and blows up the impact crater, with Samus only barely managing to escape. Scanning enough objects in the game will allow you to see Samus' slightly messed up face, but you sadly never do see her out of the suit completely. Collecting all the items in the game will reward you with a post-credits scene where a hand comes out of the remains of Metroid Prime, along with a creepy eye.
Foreshadowing.
One thing that's pretty cool is that if you have the GameCube and Game Boy Advance link cable, you can unlock all the suits from Fusion for Samus to wear, but you have to beat Prime in order to unlock it. If you manage to beat Fusion and link it with a GameCube, then you can play the original Metroid, and there's not much else to say about it. It's just Metroid on the NES, on a GameCube. Have fun! As the first 3D adventure of Samus Aran, Metroid Prime is a fantastic game. It's the Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, and Final Fantasy VII in the Metroid series, where a 2D franchise has made a very clean transition into the third dimension, and that's not easy to do. Plenty of video game franchises have been downgraded immensely because of how poor the 3D game is, and for the most part, the developers learned their lesson from that. I don't want to say if this is my favorite of the Prime games yet, because I do plan to talk about the sequels not long after this upcoming marathon, but for the time being, I will say that it definitely feels like a Metroid game, far different from any other first-person shooter I've played. I'd still have to say that my favorite game in the series is Super Metroid though. Yeah, the Prime games are longer than that one, but it didn't have any stupid fetch quests near the end or a disappointing final boss fight, and the gameplay to me was just a bit more fun. Don't get me wrong, Metroid Prime is a very fun game to play, but if I had to choose as to which one I think is better, just by an inch I'd have to go with Super Metroid. But Metroid Prime is something that I think every fan of the series has to get, and while it still takes a certain mindset to enjoy a game like this, I think casual gamers should at least give it a shot too. I'll give it a 9.5 out of 10, standing for immersion to its fine atmosphere and gameplay.
Well, this is a pretty good start, but how are the sequels compared to this gem? We shall see at a later time when I review both Metroid Prime 2 Echoes for the GameCube and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption for the Wii in one video. But the next game I'll be discussing is... What? Excuse me a sec, I gotta make a call. Yeah, hi, I'm just looking at the next game I'm going to be talking about, and I was just wondering, is this game real? The title just sounds so strange. What's it called? It's called Ape Escape. Oh, it is a real game. I see. Alright, well, thank you. Bye. Right, okay, so the next game we'll be discussing is Ape Escape for the PlayStation. My name's Josh Smith. I praise the treasure and I pick apart the trash. See ya.
Very quickly, I just want to say that I've been playing Metroid 2 a lot more than the original game recently, and I've been liking it a bit more since I did my review of it 2 years ago. It can still be pretty frustrating and boring when trying to find that one Metroid that stops you from progressing, but I think that the overall gameplay is a slightly bigger improvement on the NES game. Most people who talk about Metroid 2 will say that they aren't too crazy about the quote-unquote linearity of this game, but I don't really think it's that bad. There are still multiple pathways you can take, and I think it still has that exploration factor that the Metroid series is known for without becoming too frustrating like with the original game. Because of this, I'm going to change the score from a 6.5 out of 10 to a 7.5 out of 10, standing for an extermination on the go. Not a great score, but not bad either. There are better games in the series, and I may just be spoiled after playing and loving the hell out of Super Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission, but I don't think this one should be considered the black sheep of the Metroid universe. That's for this game.